Hi, we're continuing with Christian family today, and we're still on parenthood. Hi, I'm Jan Obridge. Welcome back to Just One Word. So parenthood, if we look in Proverbs, we can see a few scriptures here in Proverbs. Proverbs 13 and verse 24 says, "He that spareth his rod hateth his son, but he that loveth him chasteneth him quickly." We spoke about that already. Spare the rod, spoil the child, etc. It's important that we correct our children. In 22:15, it says, "Foolishness is bound in the heart of a child, but the rod of correction shall drive it far from him." Well, there's a lot about the rod of correction in there, isn't it? I thought I should get to these scriptures because I've already talked about correcting our children. Proverbs 29, verse 15. "The rod and reproof give wisdom, but a child left to himself bringeth his mother to shame." Listen, children do not naturally do what is right. That, we just read, wickedness is bound up in the heart of a child. When we're born into this world, we're born with a sinful nature. And you don't have to teach a child to say no. It's one of the first words he ever learns, isn't it? How to say no. So a child will say no, will go against what the parent is saying, just because that's what he does, right? So we need to understand that. You can't just let a child do what they like. Boundaries are important, and a lot of teaching in the last 20 years or so has been about, let a child just develop on their own and do what they want to do, and if they want to draw on the walls, it's okay because they're just being creative. Bull! Right? God doesn't let us just do our own thing. He lets us choose, but he guides us. He leads us and guides us and shows us what to do. And we have to do that with our children. If you don't give them boundaries, they will push. They always want to push the boundaries. That's just nature. They want to push the boundaries. But you've got to stand firm. Is it easier to give in sometimes? Absolutely. I remember somebody once saying, for goodness sake, just give in for a quiet life. And I said, they just said, I want a quiet life. I said, I want a quiet life, but not at any price. You see, a quiet life at any price means that you are the child and they are the parent. No, you make boundaries, you make rules, you give structure. Parents who let their children stay up till 11 o'clock at night are not doing the children any favours, even though the child may kick against it for a while. When my son first got his son back from his mother, he wouldn't go to bed on his own. He wanted my son to go and lie down with him because that's what his mother had done. Gonna lay down with him until he fell asleep. And tell him stories till he fell asleep. Well, for a few nights my son did that, but every night he would tell him that he can sleep by himself, that he's a big boy, and he would sleep by himself. And after a few days or a couple of weeks, I don't know how long, but it wasn't long, what he did was he started him speaking into his own life. He said, I want you to say this after me. Say this. Say, I fall asleep easily. I fall asleep as soon as my head touches the pillow. I sleep well. I have a good sleep, and things like that. And every night he would have him say those things. He'd get into bed and he'd say, so what are we going to say? And he would say those things, and he'd pray that he had a good night's sleep. But he'd have my son speak about it. I'm a great sleeper. I fall asleep as soon as my head touches the pillow. I get good sleep. And gradually, it took a few weeks, and at the first time that he would go and he'd read him a story, and then gradually he left the room earlier and earlier. And at first it was like, no, Daddy, don't go, Daddy, don't go, Daddy. You say, it's okay, I'm only out here. I'm only here. You just go to sleep. Remember, you sleep well. What do we say? I sleep well. I go to sleep immediately, or whatever it is he said. And gradually he would sleep by himself until in the end he'd go up, read him his story and say his prayers, and then leave him and he'd go to sleep. And sometimes he'd be asleep. In fact, what he did was he made up some stories, which one of these days we'll transcribe and put in a kid's book, called Flash the Dragonfly. And he made all these stories about Flash, and he recorded them. And so he would leave those recordings with his son. His son would play them and go to sleep listening to his daddy's voice. So be a bit creative as well. So that's a good way of bringing in boundaries. Boundaries don't come in quickly. You have to establish them soon, or you have to gradually bring them in. In 1 Thessalonians 2, verse 11, which we read, 11 and 12, which we read a couple of videos ago, in the Living Bible it says, we talk to you as a father to his own children. Don't you remember? Pleading with you, encouraging you, and even demanding that your daily life should not embarrass God, but bring joy to him who invited you into the kingdom to share his glory. So, that's the way we should be with our children. Now, when in the Old Testament, right, this is the duty of parents. Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 5. This is what parents would say to their children. They'd say, these words which I command thee this day shall be in your heart, and they shall teach them diligently unto your children. That's what we're told to do. And shalt talk to them when thou sittest in thine house, when thou walkest in the way, when thou liest down, and when thou risest up. And thou shalt bind them for a sign upon thine hand, and they shall be as a frontlet between thine eyes. And thou shalt write them upon the gates of thy house and on the posts of thy house and on thy gates. And it shall be, when the Lord thy God shall have brought thee into the land which he sware unto thy fathers, to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, to give thee good and godly cities which thou buildest not, and houses full of good things which thou fillest not, and wells digged which thou diggest not, vineyards and olive trees which thou plantest not, when thou shalt have eaten and be full. Beware lest thou forget the Lord, which brought thee forth out of the land of Egypt, from the house of bondage. Thou shalt fear the Lord and thy God, and serve him, and thou shalt swear by his name. She shall not go after other gods, of the gods of the people which are around you. For thy God is a jealous God among you, lest the anger of thy Lord God be kindled against thee, and destroy thee off the face of the earth. He said, teach these things to your children. Teach these things to your children. Teach children godly living. How do you teach them? By living it. By living godly. That's how you teach your children to be godly. By living godly. Let's go back to Proverbs. Proverbs is a great book for education, isn't it? Proverbs 1:8 says, my son, hear the instruction of thy father, and forsake not the law of thy mother. Listen, children. Listen to what your parents are saying. I mean, there's admonition to children. Obey your parents so that you'll have long life. That's a good reason to obey your parents right there, isn't it? Of course, if your parents are not giving you any instruction, you've got nothing to obey. Parents, it's a job. Listen, it's your responsibility to raise your kids. And it's no good. Sometimes I catch, a fraction of these daytime rubbishy shows. I never watch them, but sometimes I catch them. And, just catch a glimpse and it's like, oh my goodness, turn this off. Where parents are yelling at their kids and kids are yelling at their mother or father and there's this friction among families and it's hating each other. And I said, oh my goodness, how can this be? Well, that's because there's not a proper mother-daughter, father-son, mother-son, father-daughter relationship. There's not a parent-child relationship established. You can't expect children to behave like grown-ups. And when they do, because that's what you've modelled to them, you've modelled bad behaviour to them, you can't admonish them for the bad behaviour that you are modelling. You need to model good behaviour, because then you can say to them, when have you seen me do that? When have you seen me behave in that way? When have you seen us treat people like that? You haven't. Why? Because that's not the godly way to behave. And that's not the way that we choose to behave. And that's not the way that you need to be behaving. So we need to train them. In chapter 4 it says, hear ye children, the instruction of a father, and attend to no understanding. For I give you good doctrine, forsake ye not my law. For I was my father's son, tender and only beloved in the sight of my mother. He taught me also and said unto me, let thine heart retain my words, and keep my commandments and live. Keep my commandments and live. Listen, discipline should make a child feel bad about their behaviour, but feel good about themselves.